It started with a thunder of footsteps. Thousands of desperate men, women, and children surged through a wired-off corridor, racing not for fortune but for food. They weren't storming a bank or seizing an embassy. These were hungry families in Gaza, rushing distribution centers for a chance at survival. The world watched, phones in hand, as fences tumbled and crowds collided. Was this the future of humanitarian aid, or a warning sign we all failed to see? As the dust settled on the chaotic scenes at Gaza's aid centers, one question echoed far beyond the headlines. In an age of biometric scanners, closed borders, and algorithmic control, can technology truly save lives during war, or is it making things worse? To understand why the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's GHF brand new high-tech aid program triggered riots, resignations, and a global controversy, we need to rewind. This is not just another crisis update. It's a story about technology colliding with trust, the age-old challenge of neutrality, and the future of humanitarian action itself. Stick with us as we unravel the tangled web of politics, money, and machines, now dictating who lives and who starves in the world's most volatile conflict zone. Just a few years ago, the Gaza Strip was infamous for its blockaded borders, power outages, and shortages. But nothing compared to the devastation that followed the outbreak of all-out war in late 2023. Israeli airstrikes and ground operations, launched in response to a brutal Hamas attack that left 1,200 Israelis dead and 251 kidnapped, quickly engulfed the densely populated enclave. Over 8 months, more than 54,000 Palestinians were killed, according to Gaza health authorities, numbers that are shocking, even in the long history of the conflict. Economic life crumbled. The Israeli blockade, tightened in March 2024, stopped nearly all goods from entering the Strip for 3 entire months. Before the war, as one Gazan father told Reuters, his fridge was filled with meat, dairy, even soft drinks. Now, he found himself begging for a loaf of bread. International agencies scrambled to respond. The United Nations estimated that Gaza needed 500 to 600 truckloads of aid every day just to prevent mass starvation. But with borders sealed, only a trickle of supplies made it through, mostly flour and canned goods delivered well below the minimum required. Amid the wreckage, a bold new experiment emerged, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Backed by U.S. funding and Israeli approval, the GHF was designed to bypass the broken system, promising security and efficiency through technology. Their goal? Distribute food to over 1 million people, nearly half the Strip's population, using biometric identification and direct handouts at tightly secured distribution sites. On paper, it looked modern, even revolutionary. Gone were the intermediaries accused of diversion. Gone was the chaos of unregulated crowds. Aid would go directly to registered families, with each recipient scanned and verified by facial recognition software, the same tech used at airports, borders, and sporting events. The world was promised transparency and control, no more aid stolen by militants, no more black markets, just order, data, and hope. Or so the plan claimed. But when the GHF opened its first centers in the spring of 2024, the reality was far messier. Despite slick press releases and official endorsements, local trust was missing. Rumors swirled through Gaza's battered neighborhoods. Would the biometric scans be stored by Israel? Was this new foundation really neutral if its funders were also Gaza's military adversaries? And did standing in line for food mean being flagged, tracked, or worse? One father of 7, Abu Ahmed, summed up the daily dilemma. As much as I want to go because I am hungry and my children are hungry, I am afraid. I am so scared because they said the company belongs to Israel and is a mercenary, and also because the resistance said not to go. His fear wasn't unique. For days, many Gazans hesitated, torn between hunger and suspicion. By the time the crowds broke through the fences, tired of waiting, desperate for food, the aid workers could barely keep up. In just hours, 8,000 food boxes vanished into the masses, containing little more than rice, beans, pasta, oil, and sugar. Social media lit up with shaky videos, children crying, adults shouting, fences torn apart, and, at times, shots fired overhead to restore control. The attempt at high-tech order had dissolved into old-fashioned chaos. Behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. The United Nations and other major aid groups, including the International Committee of the Red Cross, swiftly boycotted the GHF. Humanitarian assistance must not be politicized or militarized, warned Christian Carden of the ICRC, a principle hammered into global conventions for decades. Yet the GHF was openly backed by Israel and the US, parties to the conflict. Critics said it undermined the very premise that aid should go to anyone in need, regardless of politics. Hamas, meanwhile, went further, calling the GHF system a tool for Israeli intelligence and warning residents not to cooperate. The group urged people to avoid biometric registration, claiming it would turn aid into a weapon and replace order with chaos. The GHF's own leadership soon fractured. Jake Wood, the high-profile executive director, resigned in protest, citing the impossibility of maintaining the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. He echoed what many aid veterans whispered, that the Gaza experiment risked setting a dangerous precedent. And the numbers told their own story. Despite GHF's aim to feed 1 million, the aid flow through their system still paled in comparison to pre-war levels, and didn't meet even half the daily minimum estimated by the UN. The situation, according to Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of UNRWA, had become undignified and unsafe. Meanwhile, Israeli officials insisted that the biometric controls and American security contractors were essential, not to punish, but to prevent Hamas from hijacking relief and using food to consolidate power. "If we cannot guarantee aid won't be stolen, we cannot allow it in," said one Israeli military spokesperson. Yet the evidence that Hamas systematically diverts aid remains hotly contested. Caught in the crossfire, ordinary Gazans grew more desperate. In Rafah, the southern city now under total Israeli control, families came on foot, in donkey carts, any way they could, to wait in the heat for a ration. When the crowds grew too dense, aid teams sometimes had to pull back for safety, abandoning their posts and letting people take aid safely and dissipate, as the GHF described it. Global reactions grew sharper. The UN's humanitarian chief, Jens Laerke, called the GHF model a distraction from the urgent need to reopen Gaza's border crossings for proper, large-scale relief. Even GHF's foreign contractors reported chaotic conditions, overwhelmed by both demand and distrust. The world's news feeds filled with images of jostling crowds, broken barriers, and relentless hunger. Amidst the acrimony, the U.S. State Department brushed off the criticism as complaints about style, a remark slammed by humanitarians as missing the point entirely. The debate sharpened. Was the real problem the method, the politics, or simply too little food? Both sides dug in. Israel defended the GHF as a clean, modern alternative to corrupt channels. The UN insisted that only a neutral, coordinated system, independent of all parties, could possibly restore dignity and sufficiency. Hamas, determined to maintain influence, threatened those who sought help from the GHF, while also denying accusations of aid theft. But for families on the ground, the argument was more immediate. It was about bread, not politics. "Before the war," as Abu Ahmed remembered, "my fridge used to be full of meat, chicken, dairy, soft drinks, everything, and now I am begging for a loaf of bread." The GHF's approach, technology-driven, security-focused, and controversial, has sparked a global debate about the future of humanitarian aid in war zones. Does biometric screening increase transparency, or does it endanger those desperate for help? Is the presence of foreign contractors a necessary evil or a provocation in a land already torn by occupation? And with the United Nations, NGOs, Hamas, and Israel all clashing over control and principles, can anyone guarantee that the next shipment of food will reach those it's meant to save? Or will another surge of chaos, mistrust, and violence push Gaza's humanitarian crisis past the point of no return? As the aid system teeters on the brink, one haunting question remains. Is the GHF's technology the future of aid in conflict zones, or is it sowing the seeds of a catastrophe no algorithm can fix? So, what does the future hold for technology-powered aid systems like the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, against the backdrop of war, politics, and desperation? Let's look ahead to the possible futures that could emerge from the chaos we're witnessing right now in Gaza. Each potential path comes with its own risks and opportunities, not only for Palestinians, but for the global humanitarian landscape. Imagine for a moment that the GHF model actually gains traction. Despite protests and boycotts, technology-driven aid distribution with biometric screening becomes the new norm, not just in Gaza, but in conflict zones everywhere. Proponents argue this offers a way to root out corruption, prevent aid theft by armed groups, and ensure precious resources get to the most vulnerable. In theory, facial recognition and digital verification could help agencies build trust with donors, who want to know their contributions aren't being diverted. But what happens if this digital infrastructure falls into the wrong hands, or is weaponized? Many in Gaza are already fearful, and for good reason. As one aid recipient told Reuters, "I'm so scared because they said the company belongs to Israel and is a mercenary, and also because the resistance said not to go." The suspicion isn't just paranoia. It's rooted in a long history of surveillance and data abuse in occupied territories around the world. Once biometric data is collected, it can be used for tracking, targeting, or even future reprisals. A single database meant for food distribution could become, in the wrong hands, a tool of repression. Meanwhile, some experts warn of a chilling precedent. Jake Wood, GHF's own former director, resigned because, as he put it, "It is not possible to implement this plan while also strictly adhering to the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, which I will not abandon." His words echo the concern of many. When humanitarian aid becomes entangled with intelligence, with military logistics, or with politics, its essential purpose is compromised. On the other hand, there's a scenario that right now seems like a distant hope, but is still possible. Could the human toll, outrage, and chaos force all parties, Israel, Hamas, the US, the UN, and humanitarian agencies, to come to the table? Could they agree on a genuinely neutral, coordinated distribution system? One without biometric gates or armed mercenaries, where aid is delivered solely on the basis of need? History shows us that protracted crises sometimes do force change, when the cost of inaction becomes too high even for the powerful. But if things continue on their current path, if politicized, militarized aid delivery becomes the new status quo, the risks are immense. The humanitarian situation could spiral further out of control. The chaos we've seen at GHF distribution centers, with fences torn down and warning shots fired by soldiers, could become the norm across the globe wherever food, medicine, and water are distributed in war zones. More than 54,000 Palestinians have already been killed in the current conflict, and with most of Gaza's population trapped and hungry, any further collapse in aid risks a full-scale famine. The United Nations has bluntly called the scenes undignified and unsafe. There are also broader, less visible risks for the future of humanitarianism itself. If neutrality becomes a casualty of war, if aid agencies are forced to become part of the security apparatus, entire populations may lose trust, not just in specific programs, but in international relief efforts as a whole. That loss of trust can outlast any one war or crisis. It can breed cynicism and resentment, making future relief efforts exponentially harder, not just in Gaza, but in places like Yemen, Syria, Sudan, and beyond. Yet the rapid adoption of high-tech solutions in aid isn't all doom and gloom. A different future remains possible, where technology is harnessed transparently and ethically, with robust oversight from neutral third parties. For example, secure, anonymous digital systems could help verify need, track distribution, and prevent diversions, without putting recipients at risk of surveillance or exclusion based on politics. But for now, in Gaza, that's not the system in place. So, what can we learn from this unfolding crisis? And what does it mean for you, watching from a world away? First, this story is a reminder that technical solutions alone cannot fix deeply political, human problems. Biometric screening and surveillance can create efficiencies, yes, but without trust, transparency, and genuine neutrality, they're just another layer of control. When humanitarian aid is filtered through the lens of military priorities, people in need are left with impossible choices: dignity or survival, privacy or bread for their families. Second, it's a call to vigilance. New technology is rapidly changing the landscape of humanitarian work. As donors, advocates, and global citizens, we need to ask hard questions about who controls these systems, who profits from them, and who is accountable when things go wrong. Are our governments supporting aid that truly adheres to humanitarian principles, or is neutrality being sacrificed for political gain? Third, the crisis in Gaza underscores the vital importance of independent oversight. The GHF's reliance on American security contractors, for example, has sparked outrage among established humanitarian organizations and prompted the United Nations and the Red Cross to boycott the Foundation's work. As Christian Carden of the ICRC puts it, humanitarian assistance must not be politicized or militarized. When respected organizations sound the alarm, the world needs to listen. For viewers in countries that fund or support international aid, in the US, Europe, and elsewhere, this is a moment to demand transparency from your governments. Where does your tax money go? Are your leaders pressuring all sides in this conflict to uphold basic humanitarian norms? public pressure, media coverage, and democratic oversight remain some of the most powerful tools for holding decision-makers accountable. And finally, this saga is also a lesson in the power and peril of innovation under pressure. War and crisis both break and remake old systems. Sometimes disaster leads to creative breakthroughs. Other times it exposes the limits of what can be achieved by technology alone. The line between relief and exploitation, between aid and surveillance, can blur alarmingly fast. So, does technology-driven humanitarian aid have a future? Absolutely. But only if it is deployed with humility, ironclad ethical safeguards, and genuine neutrality. The core lesson from Gaza is not that technology itself is evil, but that any tool can be misused if the principles behind it are weak or compromised. Now, for the answer to our central question, do high-tech politicized systems like the GHF offer a path to neutral, effective aid, or are they deepening the crisis? The reality is stark. In Gaza, the GHF program has failed to build the trust or the local legitimacy needed for true neutrality. The scenes of chaos, boycotts by respected organizations, and the resignation of GHF's own director all point in one direction. In this context, the promise of technological efficiency has come at the expense of humanitarian principles, making the crisis worse, not better. Yet this is not the end of the story. There is a lesson here for every global citizen, every policymaker, every technologist. If we want to build a world where humanitarian aid actually serves those in need, we must insist on transparency, accountability, and above all, humanity. And here's the secret fact you might not know. Many major humanitarian organizations, including some UN agencies, have privately developed their own low-tech, paper-based distribution systems during past crises, specifically because they found digital tracking too vulnerable to abuse in war zones. In the end, sometimes the safest system is the simplest one. So the next time you see international aid in the headlines, ask yourself, who controls it, who benefits, and whose voice is missing? If you found this story insightful, please hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Only by staying informed and asking tough questions can we hope to hold the powerful